Erotic Transference, CH1-Celenza. Chapter 1 Introduction. The place of sexuality and eroticism in psychoanalysis is like the lost city of Atlantis, shrouded in mystery, fantastic, and ideal, yet uncannily disappeared and dismissed, as if lacking in evidence. Despite that psychoanalysis was founded, then elaborated on this fundamental drive, Freud being our Plato, the dimensions of Eros are eternally evanescent, ultimately erased in our discourse, found and refound along the way only to be lost again. Now is a time of its reemergence, yet even in current-day practice there is a constant shying away. A legend of an ideal city, Atlantis, was first described in Plato's Timaeus. Point 1. The story is told through the words of Timaeus, a fictional Pythagorean philosopher from southern Italy, to Socrates in a monologue on the creation of the world. He describes Atlantis as a vast power that sprang forth from beyond, larger than Libya and Asia, a great and marvelous royal power, set out to enslave all reach, a point of extreme peril. The entire force sank below the earth all at once and disappeared, now unnavigable and unexplorable. The parallels to erotic life are apparent. Eroticism creates the world, internally structuring our histories and vision of externality. Its inherent effective power threatens enslavement. We risk extreme peril seeking its ideal, and it regularly disappears from view. The popular conception of Eros and the erotic qualities of life are typically associated with love and sexuality. In ancient mythology, however, Eros is, directly and indirectly, associated with a complex and contradictory set of intense affective instincts and drives, beyond love and sexuality. A primeval god of Greek mythology, later tradition made Eros the son of Aphrodite, goddess of sexual love and beauty, with his father as either Zeus, the king of gods, Ares, god of war and of battle, or Hermes, divine messenger of the gods. Point 2. Eros is the god of passion, passion defined as the sufferance or submission to intense feeling, i.e., love and hate. The erotic in psychoanalytic theorizing and maternal eroticism is similarly complex. In his later work, Freud expanded his vision of the erotic to the broad life instincts. He wrote of an expanded vision of the sexual as early as 1910, where he acknowledged as belonging to sexual life all expressions of tender feeling. We prefer to speak of psychosexuality. Sexuality in the comprehensive sense, Lieben to love, p. 91, italics in original. In the words of Merleau-Ponty, 2012/1945, the sexual is not the genital. It is what causes one to have a history, provides a key to one's life. And further, the body of the other is not perceived as an object, but rather as inhabited by a secret perception, by a sexual schema that is strictly individual. The body of the other is enigmatic. Thus, we see Eros ignites life, and we also see that with every desire comes a dread, a threat to one's being and very existence, because to encounter the other is to encounter a mystery. The mystery of the unknown, the challenge of separateness and difference, and the threat of the other's intentionality. Rilke, 1939, warns of beauty as nothing but the beginning of terror. That we revere it so, because it calmly disdains to destroy us. Larger than Libya and Asia, indeed. Desexualization of psychoanalytic theorizing. Given Freud's placement of sexuality in the center of his theorizing, the desexualization of psychoanalytic theorizing is especially surprising. Since his discovery of infantile sexuality and the establishment of the erotic instinct as fundamental to human nature, there has been a constant backing away. There is something about the inherent nature of sexuality that arouses fear and anxiety. It is not solely a contemporary phenomenon, and yet it is only in the past several decades that papers focusing on the centrality of sexuality have emerged in our literature. Laplanche, 1989, 1997, Green, 1995, Fonagy, 2008, De Masi, 2012, Celenza, 2014, Atlas, 2016, Elise, 2019, to name a few authors. Interestingly, this desexualization is not solely the province of psychoanalysis, but goes back to ancient times in other fields. It is rooted in a tendency toward dualism that long predates Descartes, derived from a desire to transcend the body, to segregate and idealize pure reason and linear, abstract thought. This dualism arises inevitably from fearing sexuality itself, not only because we are afraid of incest, as in sexual boundary violations, but because sexuality is inherently threatening. We resist erotic transferences and erotic countertransferences because we resist the expo, sure of narcissistic, Oedipal-level wounds, our patients as well as our own. Psychoanalytic authors Klein, 1930, Britain, 1992, have written about the epistemophilic impulse and its inhibition due to traumatic experiences revolving around a child's curiosity of the primal scene. But perhaps most threatening is the mysterious other. Sexuality is transgressive. We cross the boundaries of the unknown and penetrate a new frontier. Our vulnerability is our body, our nakedness, our desires in the face of the unknown other. During Freud's era, the dualism in mind/body questions was in the zeitgeist. For Freud, this was about how the psyche needs to defend itself against inner forces to maintain stability. By 1905, Freud stated that we cannot know the contents of the unconscious, and yet, he was also convinced that the mind was rooted in the body. How to contend with human reason and animal passion became his constant concern. Point 3. In accord with the dual nature of inherent drives, sexuality is one force that structures human nature. In this way, the unconscious is rooted in sexuality, vitality and creativity, and in aggression, destructiveness. Yet we tend to interpret away from sexuality due to its inherent threatening nature, the fear of the mystery of the other, our ambivalence with regard to genital aims, and fears of loss of control. Freud's era spanned the 1890s to the 1930s. This maps onto the Georgian, Victorian, and Edwardian eras in England, where there pervaded an intense religiosity and moralism. Freud himself faced great resistance to his formulations of libido and the sexual drive as basic to human nature. Yet he persevered. The psychoanalyst knows that the forces he works with are of the most explosive kind, and that he needs as much caution and conscientiousness as a chemist. But when has it ever been forbidden to a chemist, on account of its danger, to occupy himself with the explosives which, just because of their effectiveness, are so indispensable?
1915 pp.
170 to 171. We could wonder too if Freud's 1915 straddling of the real/unreal ways of understanding transference love was another desexualizing move. Rather than forthrightly defining transference as a shaping structure that signifies realness, for Freud instructed analysts to keep firm hold of the transference love, but treat it as something unreal. p. 166. A halfway backing away. Then there emerged the scientism of the Enlightenment era, a scientism that determined to take the other out of the field of observation. This structured our initial vision of the psychoanalytic enterprise, an essentially one-person psychology. The desexualization inherent in this is obvious. Freud himself expanded his interest in the erotic to the life instincts, 1920, as reflected in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, to oppose Eros with Thanatos, the death instinct, and in this way, he changed his interest from the sexual instinct to the life and death instincts. Then Klein followed with her emphasis on aggression, destruction, the death drive, and object relations, theorizing where pleasure and unpleasure became dominated by the defense of splitting and objects as good or bad. This was roughly in the 1930s to the 1960s in psychoanalytic theorizing. Winnicott, 1960, soon followed with his emphasis on the facilitating environment and the role of the mother as a holding function. Lacking erotic stimulus, development was conceived as provided and protected through containment. Birth and existence thus remained sexualized and de-aggressivized. The 1970s and 1980s in psychoanalytic theorizing can be characterized by interest in the external object, trauma, separateness, and difference, once again, a de-intensification of instinctuality in general. I propose that much of this de-intensification of psychoanalytic theorizing arose from a fundamental fear of the other, and a backing away from genital aims with their concomitant fears of loss of control, otherness, and desire in general. With the era of relational theorizing, largely centered in America in the 1980s, there became a burgeoning and much-needed interest in the maternal transferences. This was intertwined with infant observation studies and attachment theory, but through eroticized conceptions. As Andre Green, 1995, stated, it is as if the etiologic determinants of psychopathology are thought to be located before or beyond sexuality. Muriel Diamond, 1999, has attributed this desexualization in psychoanalysis to the paradigm shift in contemporary theory from drive to object relations, noting that where libido was, there shall objects be. p. 417. We should not overlook the unconscious substitution of objects for others, another desexualization through objectification that remains everyday jargon in our literature. Fonagy, 2008, quantified the apparent decline in interest in sexuality by examining word age in electronically searchable journals of psychoanalysis. He found that the decline in sexual word usage is inversely related to the rise in relational word usage. Eros in the clinical context. The desexualization of psychoanalytic theorizing continues to perplex and remains a missing aspect of the treatment situation as our anxieties and unconscious prohibitions inevitably move us away from erotics. This, despite that the clinical situation is an intimate relationship that easily lends itself to sexual metaphor. As I have written elsewhere, Celenza, 2014, the dialectic between holding and penetration fosters a mutual deepening as intimacy deepens. Knowing the other is dialectically related to desiring the other. A mutual enhancement, one seemingly defining the other through opposition, yet each paradoxically intensifying the other. To hold is to grasp, to penetrate is to transgress. Our work is penetrating and enveloping, incisive and containing, a firm receptivity that retains, envelopes, and holds the other in mind. The word is the touch, is the effect, is the knowledge. Recalling Freud, Lieben is to love. I put before us, as it were, the prospect of loving our patients and feeling sexually aroused or not. The prospect of our full receptivity in reverie, honed, and not denied. In the same anti-dualistic thinking, Hans Lowald wrote in 1970 from Psychoanalytic Theory and the Psychoanalytic Process. Scientific detachment, in its genuine form, far from excluding love, is based on it. In our work, it can be truly said that in our best moments of dispassionate and objective analyzing, we love our object, the patient, more than at any other time, and are compassionate with his whole being. In our field, scientific spirit and care for the object certainly are not opposites. They flow from the same source. P. 65. In clinical work, erotic erasure can be easily seen in contemporary theorizing of maternal transferences, reflected in the tendency to interpret downward, down and away, so to speak, from Oedipal to pre-Oedipal conceptualizations of sexuality, 5 resulting in a desexualization of the maternal erotic transference. There has been a tendency to interpret away from Oedipal erotics toward a deerotized maternal, to avoid the intensity of erotic transferences at both the Oedipal level and within the maternal transferences. Contemporary writings that correct this erasure include the works of Shasket-Smergel, 1970, M.C. Dougal, 1992, Balsam, 2001, 2003, 2008, 2012, 2019, Benjamin, 1995, Diamond, 2003, Rye and Wells, 1994, Salamonson, 2012, Elise, 2002, 2015, 2019, Celenza, 2014, 2017, 2022A, 2022B, and Atlas, 2016. We must always be aware of the threat associated with erotic transferences and the tendency to mute or bias our focus. Perhaps we fear the mystery of the other and the intensity of what may arise. At the same time, we are lured to the erotic as we want to unmask the mysteries of the other's being. There is an amusing story of 2 friends in a nudist colony. They are walking, naked, together around the grounds. One has a band-aid on his upper arm. The other asks, "Can I see what's under that band-aid?" We are drawn to the hidden and mysterious. We are tempted to push boundaries, even in the most permissive contexts. What is the nature of this push, this urge to get beyond the immediate and inside the other? What are we looking for? What does it feel like? These are some of the questions that pertain to the present exploration into erotic life in the psychoanalytic and psychotherapeutic situation. Far from Victorian England, Western cultures have made erotic life their plaything. We are bombarded with sexual imagery in all forms of media and entertainment. But do we understand it? Most importantly, can we feel it? I suspect the bombardment has had the opposite effect to what was intended. Sexual imagery in the media is not necessarily a turn-on, but has become anesthetic. Analysts must not be afraid to ask the question, always in our analysand's minds, why can't we be lovers? This is an extension of Searle's writings in Treating Severely Disturbed Patients, where he wisely said there needs to come a time in all treatments where the analyst can imagine marrying the patient. We want our analyses to be thoroughgoing, to explore the full range of affects in all its intensity. This is our definition of health and refers to the absence of inhibition. In this effort, we must welcome whatever our patients bring. It is an affirmative attitude as the basis of non-judgmentalism, the contemporary version of neutrality. In order to do this, we have to be able to bear intense hatred, contempt, devaluing, rage, and envy in order to bring these effects to the fore so that our patients can deepen their self-understanding and self-acceptance. We must recognize as well the absence of sexual feeling for our patients, not as an easy path to abstinence or neutrality, but as a present absence, a lack in our patients' vitality. In this way, our patients come to terms with, reckon with, and can take responsibility for their choices and lives. This is what we mean by wholeness and integration. At the other end of the developmental continuum, erotic and loving transferences are not acknowledged either, especially in the final phases of a successful psychoanalysis, and here I am referring to Bolognini's 1994 loving transference and affectionate transference. He describes erotic transferences along a continuum, from erotized to erotic to loving and affectionate, comprising a broader range of meanings for erotic transferences. Point 6. I see Bolognini's attempt here not to delineate variations along the dimension of real/unreal, but rather mature and less mature forms of attachment and love. In later years, he emphasized the need for the analyst to wear many hats and to balance the need for recognition of sexuality with parental protectiveness. Bolognini, 2011. Concluding remarks. In a general way, it has been said that psychoanalysis is all about sex, except for sex, that's about aggression. Always hidden, always deemed to be about something else. Further, there is confusion along another axis entirely. Is it real or is it transference, i.e. unreal? In this volume, I aim to put sexuality and eroticism back into psychoanalytic theorizing in both early formulations, as in the maternal erotic, and to delineate a place for pure erotic longing, along with the illustration of the variety of forms of homoerotic and heteroerotic desires. The framework of felt experience, embodiment, multiplicity, and fluidity in gender theory will be employed to propose ways in which binarial constraints, e.g., feminine and masculine, so often interwoven with sexual concerns and inhibitions, may be transcended. We now theoretically accept sexuality as fundamental to the structure of the mind. Green, 1995, Laplanche, 1989, 1997. For example, Laplanche's 1997-1999 General Theory of Seduction depicts the mother as the universal driving force of all scenes of seduction, presenting the infant with her enigmatic, sexual unconscious. The infant takes in and translates these mysterious messages, constituting its unconscious. These affects and longings are then rekindled in later genital sexuality, yet retain the maternal-infant dyad to serve as their template. Despite these considerations, the metapsychological theorizing continues to be hidden, submerged, or lost when discussing clinical work. Now that countertransference is legitimated, viewed as a critical channel for unconscious communication, can erotic countertransference enter our discourse, i.e., the embodied and sexual analyst? One might ask how it might be possible to do treatment without the analyst's embodiment. Sterilized exploration suffers from constriction, making the term erotic insufficiency, Brady, 2022, particularly evocative of this missing dimension. As analysts, we are the objects that will not be had, upholding the incest taboo and thereby cultivating a setting where early forms of desire can safely emerge. We must have the full range of effectivity at our disposal, but we must also help our patients reckon with, interpret, and be unafraid to experience the excitements and mysteries of their own bodies and the unknown other. At the same time, it behooves us to maintain awareness of the analyst's multiple roles in relation to the analysand, a multidimensional responsibility that is part of what should ultimately limit sexual boundary violations. See Model, 1990, Bolognini, 2011, Celenza, 2014. We don't go willingly into this terrain, for fear of its power, our own vulnerability in relation to it, the helplessness, excitement, and ignitability surrounding it. What if he says? What if she wants? What would I say? What will he feel? What might I do? It is crucial to remember that a craving for love within the analytic setting is a demand for love in the absence of a capacity for loving. Indeed, it is a manifestation of the reason a person seeks help. There is also something inherent in sexuality that leads to a claiming, a dissociation, and a tendency to bury this vital spark of our humanity. When Freud began his journey into the creation of psychoanalytic methodology and theorizing, his first patients were female hysterics, those patients whose symptoms mimicked neurological disorders, especially the abnormal electrical firing of neurons culminating in seizures. Are we to ignore the associations of fire and orgasmic-like seizures? These experiences led Freud to wonder about the etiology of the symptomatic picture in these otherwise neurologically healthy women. He speculated that dissociated ideas were leading to abnormal behaviors and realized that the unconscious can take hold of the body. For our purposes here, we should notice the dissociation of the affective component, the draining of the symptoms of their energy, their vitality, their essence. Varied communities approach the conundrum and threat of sexuality differently or for different reasons, but the results tend to be the same. A muting, a deadening, a disclaiming, or discounting to reduce its power. The scientific community of the Enlightenment era endeavors to objectify subjectivity in order to measure it and thereby control its force. Religious communities tend to relegate sexuality to prohibited, if not sinful, arenas. Ethnocultural communities tend to segregate these instincts as well, sometimes attributing the excesses of sexuality to demeaned subgroups or even genders. All this in order to disclaim our very humanity. Freud, 1917, too found the need to contend with objections to his preoccupation with sexuality, especially given that he placed it in the center of his theorizing. Opponents who do not understand the matter accuse us of one-sidedness and of overestimating the sexual instincts. Human beings have other interests besides sexual things. We have not forgotten or denied this for a moment. Our one-sidedness is like that of the chemist who traces all compounds back to the force of chemical attraction. In doing so, he does not deny the force of gravity. He leaves that to the physicist to reckon with. p. 349. Our present-day scientism has replaced the blank screen of the Enlightenment era with a postmodern epistemology, essentially perspectivism. Transferences and countertransferences are now understood as a mutual construction, realities that are co-created. Yet we have to be comfortable. Our sexuality is aroused with the encounter of the other, the mystery of the other, our irreducible separateness, difference, and intentionality. There are always these unknown aspects. This is the nature of the threat. This reminds me of an interaction I had with my analyst. One day, as I entered the office and crossed the room about to lie down, I saw, to my horror, a barrette on the couch. I took it between my fingers and held it up to him, asking, "You see other women?" To which he deftly responded, "It was a man wearing a wig." If only we all could respond with such deftness and aplomb, if not a touch of peskiness and teasing. We have a large task ahead. We speak of things that resist revelation, surrounded with resistance, that don't want to be tamed while luring us to the edge, then disappear, leaving us empty-handed, bewildered, sometimes frightened, and yet always intrigued.